There's a difference between having potential and activating it. Every person is born with something unique inside of them, an inner capacity for greatness that, if tapped into, can alter not just their own life, but the world around them. But this potential is not a gift that functions automatically. It doesn't ignite just because you're alive. It demands your conscious engagement. It calls on your belief, your grit, your courage to keep going when it gets uncomfortable, and your willingness to commit, even when there's no applause. People often underestimate just how much lies dormant within them. They measure themselves by current circumstances, by what they've done so far, or worse, by the labels others have placed on them. But potential doesn't shrink because your surroundings are small. Your potential is not determined by your job title, your zip code, or your past mistakes. It is something far deeper, woven into your DNA, waiting to be revealed through action and perseverance. Yet having that potential means nothing if you don't believe in it. You can be sitting on enough talent to change your industry, enough creativity to write a best-selling book, enough strength to rebuild your life from scratch. But if you don't believe that you're capable, it will remain buried under doubt, fear, and hesitation. Belief is the spark that lights the fuse. It's the inner voice that says, maybe I can, when everything else says you can't. And once that belief is strong enough, it becomes the foundation upon which effort can build. Effort is what separates those who dream from those who do. You don't get to skip the hard parts. Dreams without effort are fantasies, and talent without discipline is wasted. If you want to see your potential manifest, you have to get comfortable with discomfort. Growth doesn't happen in the safe zone. It happens when you take the risk, when you try again after failure, when you invest time you don't feel like giving, and energy you didn't think you had. It happens when you hold yourself to a higher standard, even when nobody's watching. Effort doesn't always produce immediate results. This is where most people give up. They expect quick rewards for limited work. But unlocking your potential is a long game. Sometimes you'll put in everything and see nothing, at least on the surface. But beneath that frustration, under the surface, the roots are growing. Skills are developing. Strength is building. Confidence is forming. Every day you choose to push forward, even when it's hard, you're shaping yourself into the person capable of living up to that limitless potential. Belief and effort are partners. One without the other leaves you stuck. If you believe in yourself but don't act, you'll stay in the realm of theory and hope. If you work hard but don't believe in the outcome, you'll burn out because there's no conviction in your direction. When you combine the two, when you believe that what you have matters and you put in the work to sharpen it, that's when momentum starts. That's when you go from waiting on a breakthrough to becoming the breakthrough. Your potential is not static. It evolves as you evolve. The more you stretch yourself, the more you'll realize you can handle. The more risks you take, the more courage you develop. The more you commit to the work, the more doors begin to open. And here's what's even more powerful. The moment you start moving in alignment with your potential, other people begin to see it too. Opportunities find their way to those who move with conviction. Possibilities expand for those who meet their days with intention. You don't have to be perfect to begin. You just have to be willing. Belief and effort are the currency you exchange for progress. Failure is not the final word. It never was, and it never will be, unless you let it. Too often, people walk around carrying the weight of their past mistakes like permanent labels. A bad decision becomes their identity. A missed opportunity becomes their ceiling. But failure is not a sentence, it's a season. And seasons change. What happened behind you does not get to dictate what is ahead of you unless you surrender your power to it. You are more than what went wrong. The truth is, failure is a natural part of any growth process. It's a signal, not a stop sign. It teaches, it refines, it reshapes. The most capable people in the world have a backstory filled with setbacks. That's not a coincidence. It's a requirement. You can't develop resilience by reading about it. You build it through trials. You build it through falling down and making the decision to get back up with more wisdom, more humility, and more clarity than before. What's dangerous isn't the failure itself. It's how we internalize it. Somewhere along the way, we confuse failing at something with being a failure. We tie our worth to our outcomes instead of our effort. That's where the damage begins. Because if you start to believe that every stumble is a reflection of who you are, you'll stop taking chances. You'll shrink your life to avoid more pain. You'll begin to avoid the very things that could help you grow, because the fear of failing again becomes stronger than your desire to move forward. But the truth is, your future is not written in the ink of your past. You can fail at something 100 times and still be destined for greatness if you're willing to learn and evolve. Every setback contains information, valuable, often brutally honest feedback about what didn't work and what needs to change. The people who rise are the ones who listen to the lesson but don't bow to the defeat. They use their past as a platform, not a prison. They recognize that scars can be reminders, but they don't have to be chains. You were not meant to carry your old failures forever. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to be controlled by something that no longer serves your growth. It means understanding that yesterday's mistakes are not indicators of tomorrow's limits. They are experiences. And experiences, when processed correctly, become wisdom. They become part of the foundation you build your new life on. Without them, you'd lack the depth, the empathy, and the sharpness required to truly thrive. Every great story includes a chapter that almost ended it. But what makes it great is that it didn't end there. The hero found a way to rise. They didn't erase the chapter. They overcame it. You are allowed to do the same. You can revise the narrative. You can go from being the person who failed to the person who used failure as fuel. In fact, the people who go the furthest often aren't the ones who got it right the first time. They're the ones who refused to let failure define the limits of their worth. There is something powerful that happens when you stop fearing your past and start using it. You begin to understand that experience is your greatest asset. You know what doesn't work. You know the cost of complacency, the weight of regret, and the price of hesitation. That knowledge can either haunt you or empower you. And when you decide to let it empower you, it becomes the compass that points you toward better decisions, stronger boundaries, and bolder action. Even the most painful moments can become part of a breakthrough if you refuse to stay stuck in them. The moment you stop letting failure narrate your future, you open the door to new strategies, new courage, and new possibilities. It's not about pretending the fall didn't happen. It's about showing that the fall didn't finish you. You have more inside of you than your past could ever measure. Most people don't fail because of what the world puts in front of them. They fail because of what they tell themselves is impossible. The most powerful prison is not made of bars or chains. It's built in the mind. It's the voice that says, "You're not smart enough. You're not ready. Someone like you can't do that." These are the invisible walls we build ourselves, and we live inside them as if they are truth. But the fact is, these walls are not made of reality. They are made of fear, doubt, and outdated beliefs that no longer serve who we are becoming. These self-imposed limitations often start early. Sometimes they're shaped by what we were told growing up, other times by how we interpreted failure. A child told to stay quiet may grow into an adult who thinks their voice doesn't matter. A student who struggled in school might carry the belief that they're not intelligent even after gaining skills and wisdom through life experience. The problem is that these beliefs go unchallenged. We assume they're fixed, but in truth, they're just unexamined. And as long as they remain unexamined, they become ceilings on our potential. Mental barriers don't show up like alarms. They show up like logic. They disguise themselves as being realistic or practical. They whisper things like, now isn't the right time, or that's too risky, or people like you don't do things like that. And because those thoughts come from within, we often trust them. We accept their limitations as fact, when really they are nothing more than conditioned responses designed to keep us in familiar territory. But familiar doesn't mean right, and safe doesn't always mean true. There comes a point where you must question what you've accepted as your limits. You have to ask yourself, who told me this was all I could be? Who convinced me that this dream is out of reach? And more importantly, is it true? Because when you trace many of your limitations back to their source, you'll often find that they were never yours to begin with. They were passed down, picked up, or built during a time when you didn't yet know your full strength. But you're not that same person anymore. You've lived, you've grown, you've overcome things you thought would break you. And yet you're still letting outdated thoughts shape what's possible for you now. Breaking through these mental barriers starts with awareness. You have to notice the voice that speaks limitation and call it out. When it says, you'll fail, ask, based on what? When it says, you can't, respond with, who says? Because every major shift in life begins with a decision to stop believing the lies you've repeated so often that they sound like facts. Just because something has been true up to this point doesn't mean it has to continue being true. Change begins when belief changes. Another thing to realize is that most of your limits have never actually been tested. You think you can't write the book, start the business, give the speech, or rebuild the life, not because you've tried and failed, but because you've never really tried with your whole heart. You've hesitated, you've delayed, you've waited for a perfect moment that never came. And in that waiting, the mental barrier grows stronger, becoming more convincing every day. But when you finally decide to act, when you face the fear and move through it, that barrier starts to weaken. It begins to crack, revealing just how much of it was imagined all along. Courage is not the absence of these mental limitations. It's the choice to act in spite of them. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to stop giving your fears the authority to decide your future. Every time you do something you thought you couldn't, you prove that the wall in your mind wasn't real. It was just a shadow of a thought, waiting to be replaced by something stronger. The more you challenge those internal limits, the more you reclaim power over your own life. Because your greatest breakthroughs won't come from changing the world around you. They'll come from changing the way you see yourself within it. The space between where you are and where you want to be is not just made of time or opportunity. It is made of action. Possibilities remain possibilities until you act on them. They live in the realm of what could be, what might happen, what's waiting around the corner. But without movement, they stay there, untouched, unrealized, dormant. The gap between potential and progress is always filled by action, and nothing else can take its place. Many people spend their lives hoping for a sign, waiting for permission, or looking for the perfect plan before they begin. But action doesn't come after clarity. It often brings clarity. You don't wait to feel ready to act. You act until you feel ready. Action has a way of unlocking momentum that thought alone cannot produce. You can read every book, attend every seminar, gather advice from every expert, and still remain exactly where you are if you never take the first uncomfortable, imperfect step. But the truth is, action rarely feels comfortable. That's where courage comes in. Courage is the bridge between intention and execution. It's not loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes, courage looks like showing up again after failure. Sometimes it's sending the email, making the call, walking into the room where you feel out of place. Courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about moving forward even while the fear is present. It's the quiet rebellion against self-doubt that whispers, "Do it anyway." Too often, we overestimate the size of the risk and underestimate the strength within us. We convince ourselves that starting is too dangerous, too costly, too uncertain, but the real cost is in staying still. Stagnation doesn't feel dangerous at first. It feels safe. It feels like a break. But over time, it becomes heavy. It builds regret. It creates distance between who you are and who you know you could be. Action is what disrupts that cycle. It's the great equalizer between dreamers and doers. The truth is, everyone feels fear. Everyone experiences doubt. What separates those who achieve their possibilities from those who don't is not talent, luck, or even intelligence. It's a willingness to move through uncertainty and act anyway. Courage is the common denominator in every success story. It's the ingredient that doesn't show up on resumes or in accolades. But without it, none of those achievements exist. Courage is the heartbeat of growth, and action is its pulse. You will not always have the full picture before you begin. In fact, most of the time you won't. But progress doesn't require perfection. It requires movement. The first step might be shaky, the plan might evolve, and there will be moments of doubt. But one step leads to another. One action builds confidence. One moment of courage strengthens your ability to face the next. And before you know it, what once seemed impossible becomes familiar. What once felt too big becomes manageable. What once intimidated you becomes your new normal. Action and courage don't eliminate fear, they override it. You might still feel the butterflies in your stomach, the lump in your throat, the hesitation in your chest. But with each step forward, you prove to yourself that fear is not the ruler of your life. You take back control. You become the kind of person who acts in alignment with their vision, not their anxiety. You become someone whose actions reflect possibility, not limitation. Courage doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees growth. Every time you choose action over avoidance, you strengthen your resilience. Every time you step into the unknown, you expand what's possible for you. There's no shortcut around this truth. The life you want, the goals, the breakthroughs, the transformation, it all begins with the moment you stop waiting and start doing. And the more you act, the more you realize that courage was never about having no fear. It was about deciding that what you want is worth facing the fear for. Everyone has a story they tell themselves. Some of those stories are empowering. They remind you of your strength, your resilience, your ability to overcome. But others are silent saboteurs. They live in your thoughts like background noise, repeating the same doubts, fears, and limitations until you start believing them as truth. These stories don't shout, but they shape everything: how much you believe in yourself, what you think you deserve, and how far you're willing to go. True growth does not begin with external change. It begins when you confront these inner narratives and ask the hardest question of all: is this story really true, or have I just repeated it so many times that it feels real. Most limiting stories come from experience that left an emotional imprint. A moment when you failed, and instead of viewing it as temporary, you adopted it as an identity. A time when someone underestimated you and their voice became part of your internal dialogue. Maybe you tried something once and it didn't work out, so you began telling yourself that it never will. Without realizing it, you began building a life around these invisible scripts that were never meant to be permanent. But when a story goes unchallenged, it becomes a belief. And belief is powerful enough to dictate behavior. If you've told yourself that you're not a leader, you'll hesitate to speak up. If you believe you're not creative, you won't pursue ideas. If your internal story says you always quit, you'll subconsciously sabotage your momentum just to stay in alignment with that identity. And the irony is, none of this is rooted in who you truly are. It's rooted in unexamined moments that were never questioned. Growth begins the moment you challenge those beliefs and ask, where did this come from? And do I still want it to be part of who I am? Challenging a story isn't easy because it often means stepping outside of the identity you've worn for years. It's uncomfortable to admit that the narrative you've lived by might be flawed. It's painful to realize you've been holding yourself back, not because of circumstance, but because of the way you've framed your experience. But that discomfort is the doorway to transformation. You cannot rewrite your life until you confront the words it's been written in. The most powerful shift you can make is choosing to become the editor of your own story. This means you stop being the passive recipient of old patterns and start being the active author of new ones. It means questioning the assumptions you've made about yourself, not out of judgment, but out of curiosity. Growth happens when you decide to stop playing small simply because the story in your head says you're not ready. It happens when you look at your own limiting beliefs and refuse to let them go unchecked any longer. Every time you challenge a limiting belief, you take back control of your future. You begin replacing "I can't" with "what if I could?" You replace "that's just how I am" with "that's how I used to be." And in doing so, you open the door to a version of yourself that's been waiting beneath the surface. The version of you who acts with confidence, who sets boundaries, who takes risks, not because they're fearless, but because they're committed to growth. You're allowed to change the narrative. You're allowed to let go of the story that says you're not enough, not ready, or not capable. No story should have the power to keep you stuck unless you continue to believe in it without examination. Sometimes growth means outgrowing the voice in your head that once kept you safe. Sometimes it means daring to believe a new story even before you've seen the proof. Because the moment you begin to shift the story, you begin to shift your choices. And when your choices change, your life begins to reflect the new possibilities that were always there, just waiting for you to believe in a different version of yourself. You were never meant to live confined by doubt, fear, or the echoes of who you used to be. You were designed to evolve, to expand, and to rise again and again. Your potential is vast, but it will only take form when you believe in it and fight for it. No matter what your past looks like, it does not define your future. Every failure you've endured, every setback you've survived, they were never the end of your story. They were the preparation. The limitations that seem so real are often just shadows on the wall, shaped by old stories and unchallenged fears. But when you act in spite of those doubts, when you move forward with courage, you begin to dismantle those barriers piece by piece. Because nothing changes until you do. Growth doesn't come from wishing, hoping, or waiting. It comes from rewriting the stories that have held you back and choosing every day to step into the truth of who you are becoming. The possibilities before you aren't just dreams. They are real, they are waiting, and they are limitless for the one who is bold enough to believe it, brave enough to act on it, and relentless enough to never stop reaching for it. Would you like this formatted for delivery as a speech or visual presentation?